We'll be watching those storms closely as we head throughout this evening.
It'll be a busy night. You'll be on it, Mark. Thank you. Let's go back to Matt Salemi and News Chopper 12. Those protesters have been walking onto the 794 ramp, and we see they've gathered there. It looks like law enforcement is on the scene as well, Matt.
Yeah, law enforcement took a little time this time. They were not ready for it. They pretty much strolled right up the Milwaukee Street on-ramp to 794 eastbound. A couple of squads and a couple of vans full of sheriff's deputies showed up after the fact, and they have now run up to the front of where the protesters are marching. Looks like we're having a little bit of a skirmish here. They tried to stop them from actually getting all the way down the Hone Bridge. I'm going to widen out here once and show you how far they made it actually. Here's where the on-ramp branches in, and here's where they actually started getting on the on-ramp. They were able to stop all the vehicles that were following them from getting on and following along, but they were not able to stop the marchers from getting all the way up. So now we have a group of marchers and a couple of the vehicles that were at the front of the line stuck on the ramp trying to push forward and continue southbound, and a group of officers that ran past, and it looks like now there's a little bit of smoke coming off the top. Looks like a smoke grenade went off. They've had a little bit of shoving and pushing here as well. It looks like they're trying to fight them to go back down the same ramp they came up.
Matt, really quick before we go to break, I do want to ask you, I was looking at a monitor off to the side. It looked as if law enforcement was running up on the one side of the ramp and the marchers were on the other side of the ramp trying to catch up. And those vehicles, which you see right there, were also driving up and passing the protesters as well.
Yeah, well, the vehicles first came up the ramp, and they blocked off right here where the ramp merges in, so you can see some of those people now turning around. They blocked off the access for the sheriff's department because there was cars there. So this van and all the sheriff's squads here came rolling up after the fact, and then they started running as fast as they could up the freeway itself. They were no longer on a ramp. They ran right up the freeway. Looks like one of the protesters might have tossed the gas canister off down into the parking lot below. Still one smoking there on the freeway itself. Again, this is the 794 eastbound, basically the Hone Bridge. They stopped them before they actually got to the bridge. Looks like they might be making one arrest here at this point. I see them trying to cuff somebody here by this SUV, and it looks like they're still working to push everybody back. Now, the Enterprise truck and the couple of other vehicles that you see that don't have signs or people hanging out of them, those were the cars that were just caught off guard as they were making their way eastbound. So they were kind of trapped between the protesters that were driving and the protesters that were marching. And once those cars cleared, they kind of tried to follow along as the sheriff's deputies were running up. And it looks like now the protesters have tossed both of the gas canisters that the police tossed over the bridge and down into the parking lot below. But it looks like everybody is walking backwards now, heading off of the ramp.
And there has been a peaceful protest going on throughout the day in Milwaukee. A large group of people, they started in Bayview, in Humboldt Park. They marched their way to downtown this afternoon, and then on their way to the Milwaukee Police Headquarters. They covered about 5 or 6 miles in this march, and then it looks as if they headed back to the downtown area. This would be the area right here that would send them back over to Bayview, Matt.
Right, the freeway would lead them right back. That would be my thought. Is what they were trying to do was get the freeway back. But you know, we saw them come up the side streets. We saw them come up KK and First Street and march through the 3rd Ward on Water Street up through downtown to Wells, and then they cut over to the Police Administration Building around Wells and State off of Water Street. So they actually encountered very little police presence along the entire march. We watched most of it, and they didn't encounter any police until they got to. I saw one police van along that route, and then there was dozens of officers and dumpsters up around the Police Administration Building, so the cars that had been following couldn't follow along. And so this is the first time they've actually encountered any resistance from the police as they've marched their way around ever since they were at the Police Administration Building. Looks like another scuffle now. Looks like they're trying to make some arrests. Looks like they're meeting a little bit of resistance. You can see some punches being thrown, some people being knocked to the ground. This is the first time we've seen this kind of clash during daylight hours with the police. Again, it looks like there's some pushing and shoving going on as the officers are trying to make some arrests, and they're trying to force them back off of the freeway.
Matt, can you tell who's on the ground right there? Is that an officer, or are they arresting someone?
No, that is a marcher. They're arresting somebody. You see the gym shoes there. That is not police issue. Looks like a baseball cap or a riot shield might have fallen off while the pushing and shoving was going on. So it looks like they've taken at least 2 people into custody that I've seen so far with all the pushing and shoving that's been going on. And it doesn't look like folks want to, looks like they're trying to force them to go back, and they keep putting the gas canisters out, and the protesters keep tossing them off the side of the bridge down into the parking lots below.
And Matt, that stood out when you said earlier when we talked to you and you gave us that perspective a short time ago, how they were coming onto the ramp and there was no police presence there with them. And then, as I said, off camera, I was watching your live feed coming in, and to see those officers running on the left side of the ramp, and you had the protesters on the right side of the ramp, and then you had vehicles in between, and the officers were trying to catch up and get in front of that large group of people. And that's where we picked it up right there, where we saw that confrontation on that ramp.
Right, earlier in the week, every protest march that we've seen so far up until today, every time the protest got anywhere near the freeway, they would shut it down in both directions and block the ramps in both directions. And, you would see dozens of squads, like the other day we saw them at North Avenue try to get on 43. There was 15, 20 sheriff's deputies and at least 30 Milwaukee police that showed up before they even had a chance to make it down the ramp. So today, when I saw them just kind of stroll right up the ramp, I was a little surprised that we didn't see the police get here a little bit quicker. And the sheriff's department's usually pretty quick on keeping people off of the freeway. They don't want anybody being struck by a car, especially at this time of day. You've got a lot of people not always obeying the speed limit with the light volume that we've seen during the lower amount of people with the pandemic going on as well. So it's definitely a dangerous situation to put people into as they walk their way onto the freeway. But you can see more squads have shown up now. We've got a new line of sheriff's deputies in addition to the first ones that showed up. And everybody looks like they're trying to cooperate now and starting to push back. Looks like a truck full of deputies showed up here. As you can see, the big people hauler there dropped off an extra load of officers, and now everybody's kind of walking back without much resistance at this point. So it looks like the scuffles that happened, 2 people that I saw for sure get put in cuffs, and now everybody seems to be heading back down the ramp.
And that smoke as well that we saw. If you're just joining us, what we're looking at, live pictures coming in from Matt Salemi in News Chopper 12. This is the ramp to 794 downtown Milwaukee. He was showing us the images of protesters. They were making their way onto the ramp to head south on 794. And that's when law enforcement came running up on the side to get ahead of them. There have been protests going on, a protest going on throughout the day in the city of Milwaukee. It's been a peaceful protest. It's covered several miles. It started in Bayview at Humboldt Park this afternoon. The protesters worked their way up to the downtown area and then to the police administration building. We've been checking in with our live crews along the way. Again, no events no confrontations that we know of along the way until we've seen this scene playing out right in front of us right here on 794. And again, as we reported, the mayor said that there will not be a curfew in place tonight. We've had one in Milwaukee the last 3 nights. He said there will not be one tonight. However, he did say that if the conditions warrant, he will change that and put one into place on short notice. As of right now, there is no curfew in the city of Milwaukee. Again, protesters now, they are getting off the ramp, the 794 ramp. And Matt, they would be going into, at this point, they'd be going into the 3rd Ward.
Yeah, it's right where the 3rd Ward meets downtown. Exactly. It's the Milwaukee Street on-ramp that they access, and they're going back down the exact same ramp. More and more sheriff's deputies continue to arrive at the scene, so everybody seems to be now heading back down the ramp without any pushing and shoving from the officers. I'm going to widen out here and see what they've got at the bottom of the ramp. I'm guessing they have it blocked off. Yeah. So the cars that were following them, they're kind of still stuck here. The sheriff's department got to the ramp, but there was only one squad, so they weren't able to keep everybody from following, but they were able to prevent that long line of cars. There was 7 city blocks of cars that were following along with the march today, and they were stuck with them until they got to the police administration building. They had all those dumpsters on the streets along State Street and 7th Street, right along there, 8th Street by the police administration building had dumpsters set up, so the cars got cut off, but then they rejoined them once they started marching again. And you can see at the bottom, no worries of anybody else trying to get on the ramp as these people are exiting, because there's sheriff's deputies now all over the scene.
Matt, can you just pan your camera over? I know you're circling around, so I don't know if you can, but did you see people near the officers there? Did they have their hands up? Is that what I saw?
From time to time we've seen, yeah, there's one guy that has his hands up as he's walking backwards. A lot of everybody else with their hands up, kind of marching off the ramp at this point.
And at this point, Matt, we don't know where they're going to go next, because as we just saw in your shot right there, it looks like people are collecting at the foot of that ramp. They're not they're not moving out from there. So we don't know where they'll go next. Again, protesters had started in the Bayview area. This route there, getting on 794, would have taken the group back to the Bayview area. So we're not sure where they'll head next. But again, we're seeing a police presence, law enforcement presence on the 794 ramp. This is the downtown Milwaukee area. Protesters had made their way onto the ramp to 794. They were working their way up there, and that's when law enforcement ran up on the side to catch up to them, to stop them. We saw some smoke that was fired in that area or dispersed in that area. We also saw what appeared to be at least a couple people taken into custody on the ramp, and now what we're seeing those people being walked back down. They turned around and started working their way back down the ramp, and now we see they are gathered in the area near the 3rd Ward and downtown Milwaukee on some of those surface streets right there. And in the middle of all this, it looks as if you not only have law enforcement vehicles, but you also have cars in the area that were trying to get through this area or even trying to get onto the ramp, because that's something that we saw as well as they were walking up there. There were vehicles that were going up the ramp as well, because at that point law enforcement had not arrived yet on the scene. So vehicles were driving up on that ramp and passing the protesters.
Yeah, the protesters got on the ramp without any resistance from the police, and the freeway was still open at the time that they did it. So their own vehicles, the protesters, they've been traveling with, a dozen or 2 dozen vehicles ahead of the crowd, and then 50 to hundreds of vehicles behind the crowd. Pretty much every protest we've seen. So they got the first half of them, and the lead cars got to the top of the ramp before they were able to shut down the freeway. So the sheriff's department then, a couple minutes after they had already established themselves well onto the freeway, then rolled up, raced to the front of the line, and started trying to get everybody to exit and walk back down the ramp. Now the freeway itself, they have the appropriate ramp shut down. There's no more access. You can see they have the 794 ramp to continue down to Bayview. They have that shut down right now. They have, let's see if these are sheriff's deputies. I'm guessing yes. Yeah, they're sheriff's deputies coming down. So the 794 ramps in the Market Interchange appear to be shut down. Only thing getting through now is, looks like they're forcing everybody off at the St. Paul James Lovell exit. And anything that's coming through now in the eastbound direction, which is the direction that they were on, those are all sheriff's vehicles. More and more of them racing into the scene at this point.
So Matt, if I understand you correctly, some of the vehicles that we saw going up the ramp, those were some of the vehicles involved in the protests. As you mentioned, we have seen vehicles involved in some of the protests the last few days. So your understanding is that some of those vehicles were part of that? It wasn't just, that wasn't routine traffic trying to pass them?
So what happened is, as I mentioned, they had about a half dozen vehicles ahead of them as they tried to get on the freeway. Those vehicles then got up to the top of the freeway, and they pulled across right here where the ramp merges in, and they stopped an Enterprise rental truck and maybe a half dozen other vehicles that looked like they were just trying to drive down the south side of the bridge. So some of the vehicles that did get onto the freeway were part of the protest, and we've seen them leading the way throughout the afternoon here. So those first lead vehicles made it on, blocked off traffic, and none of the rest of the system had been shut down. So we had dozens of cars pulling eastbound, leaving the Market Interchange, heading east down 794, and then they ran into where it was closed by the protesters, not by the sheriff's department. So that's why those vehicles were stuck there. Those were people trying to get home, being blocked by the protest vehicles. We've seen them do that in all these protests. They'll drive up an intersection, block it off, then the protests will march through, then they'll run up, kind of like you see police do when there's either a police funeral or some sort of police escort. They'll race up ahead and block the street up to make sure nobody tries to access it. So now it looks like everybody's marching their way back up Milwaukee Street at this point. I'm not sure if there was any arrests made at the base of the freeway, but at this point it looks like they're allowing them all, everybody that came back off of the freeway under their own power without shoving back against the police, are now walking back up. I think it's Milwaukee Street they're going back up, because it looks like that's where the ramp, it just kind of feeds right back into it. And now you can see dozens of officers blocking the ramp, or sheriff's deputies, I believe these are. These came from the sheriff's vehicles that are parked up on top of the ramp. They're the ones that marched back down the ramp with the protesters. The protesters now making their way back up Milwaukee Street into downtown again. They're going northbound.
Okay, going back into downtown, that was going to be my question, because as we saw earlier today, protesters had worked their way up from Bayview. They went into downtown. They gathered at City Hall at one point and then worked their way west to Milwaukee Police Headquarters, where they gathered there for quite some time late this afternoon, early this evening, and then started working their way back. But from what you can see right here, they're all still together, or did people split at this point?
So we saw maybe a couple hundred leave after they were at the police administration building, and it looks like now I'm guessing it's not quite the numbers, because when we first encountered it, it was between 1,000 and 2,000 people, and I don't think there's that many there right now. It's harder for us to keep an eyeball on exactly where they are with all the tall buildings through downtown, but as I zoom in here between the buildings, you'll see it doesn't look like they're 1,000 strong anymore at that point. I see it maybe between 300 and 400 people still making their way up. Would be just a guesstimate, Patrick, as I'm looking at it from 1,000 feet above.
And at this point, we don't know where they're going. We just know that this group right here is heading into downtown. Again, we just want to get you caught up if you're just joining us. We were live in our 6 o'clock newscast. Matt Salemi was showing us some of the images. We've been reporting on protests, a protest that has been going on throughout the day here in the city of Milwaukee. It started this afternoon. Protesters gathered in Humboldt Park in Bayview. They worked their way to downtown, to City Hall, and then they went up to the police administration building, where they gathered there. It's been a peaceful protest throughout the day. We've had our crews following along, a large crowd, as Matt Salemi mentioned, and then during our newscast, we were tracking the protesters. They worked their way over to the 794 ramp, and that's where we saw those protesters start to get on the ramp to 794. They got there before law enforcement arrived, and then we saw law enforcement sprinting up the side of the ramp to try to get ahead of them. There was a confrontation at some point on the ramp. We saw smoke that was dispersed. We saw a couple people taken into custody, and then the crowd turned around and started to work their way back, with law enforcement moving in that direction as well. So that gets us to where we are right now. It looks as if they've moved everyone off the ramp at this point. Matt, as you spin around right there, the ramp, it's still closed at this point. It looks like they still have law enforcement over there as well. Is that?
I saw some police. I saw some firefighters come up. I was wondering if somebody might have been hurt in the skirmish. They might be checking out somebody. I'm not sure who. Yeah, there's somebody in cuffs there that the paramedics are looking at. So looks like somebody might have had a minor injury. You can see they're standing, being evaluated with the cuffs on. So that caught my eye. That's why I spun the camera around, Patrick. The fire truck rolling up the ramp, but the freeway remains shut down. 794 eastbound shut down. Everybody's being forced off either into the Market Interchange or at the St. Paul James Lovell exit. Those are the two exits they're letting people on. They also have the Lincoln Memorial access ramp shut down, as well as that Milwaukee Street on-ramp shut down. But it looks like they're getting ready to wrap this end up here by where Lincoln Memorial's ramp merges in, once the paramedics are done evaluating the people that they've arrested here at the top of the bridge.
Right, and again, this is downtown Milwaukee. You saw when Matt zoomed out a little bit, you probably saw the logos there on the Summerfest grounds right there. So he's just west of the Summerfest grounds. That would be 794 right there. You can see some of the tall buildings in downtown in the foreground of your shot. So they got the protesters turned around. They're off the ramp right now at this point. And then, as Matt was pointing out, several people in that group then started to head north into downtown Milwaukee. At this point, we don't know where this group is headed. We don't know where they're going next, but we're going to stay on it. We're going to continue to track them. And again, we are waiting for 794 to reopen in that area. We're not sure when that will happen, but as Matt zooms in, you can see there's still some law enforcement parked in that area at the base of that ramp, blocking traffic, so vehicles can't get on at this point. There were some vehicles early on who got on there along with the protesters, but then they shut it down once law enforcement arrived. We're going to stay on this. We'll also keep the live feed up as well, but we'll have much more on this coming up tonight on 12 News at 10.
You've been watching breaking news coverage from WISN 12 News. Stay with WISN 12, WISN.com, and our WISN mobile apps for continuing coverage.